So let me just create a new scene, and we're going to do this from scratch. So I'm going to create a new scene. I'm going to create a reference and bring in the Bali rig right here. So here's our Bali character. Simple, legs, hips, that's it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a ground plane for the character to walk on. Always a good thing to do. Now, if you want your ground plane to be exactly level to the floor, all you need to do is set your translate Y to be -half of your scale Y. So scale Y is 100 here. Translate Y will be -50. Make sure I type that in right, -50. There we go. Now it's perfectly lined up with the ground here. Okay, so we've got our ground plane. Let's move our cameras in place here. So we've got our camera right there. Good to go. Our side camera, I usually like to animate walking left to right. I think there's honestly no preference to this. It's whatever you like more. I think it's mostly because since I read left to right, it just feels more natural to me. Now, for anyone who doesn't know this, there's a quick way to change this in your orthographic views. By default, you'll see that my side camera is the character facing right to left. So I could spin the character here and have them animate the other way. But if I do that, now you'll notice that they're walking away from the front camera. So that's not great. I could create a new camera, I could move the camera, I could do all sorts of things there. But Maya actually has not only a side and a front camera, but it has a back and other side camera. So a left camera and a right camera. The way you access this is just hold down the space bar and you'll notice the hotbox comes up here. Just click and hold in the middle section here and you have your different views. So you have a front view, a back view, a left view, and a right view. And you even have top and bottom. So here, I'm just going to switch this to left view. And there we go. Now I've got my character ready to go. So we've got our character right in here. I'm going to set my frame range. So a walk cycle follows, or a vanilla walk cycle specifically, follows a very specific structure. And this structure is a key component of understanding how to break down your work. So a walk cycle has a key every 3 frames. So what are the keys? Well, they're the contact, the down, passing, up, contact. So that's the cycle that we want to go for. And then down, passing, up, contact again. So this is what we're looking for right here. And each of these will happen every 3 frames. So we're going to have a key on frame 1, 3 frames later on frame 4, on frame 7, on frame 10, and then our cycle where we get the next contact is going to be on frame 13 right there, and then we repeat. So total, it's a 12 frame cycle right here. Now, why is this important? It can be very deceiving, honestly, at first, because this is not how most people walk. If you actually look at people taking walks and, again, time things out, you'll notice that it doesn't always happen every 3 frames. Sometimes it could be 2 frames. Sometimes it could be 6 frames. There's so many different variations in the timing. Why is this important? Well, one is a nice even structure. So that makes it easy to work with, especially when you're first starting out. But the other thing that this represents is 2 things. One, it's the standard rate that most people will walk at as a normal walk rate, which is 12 frames per step or half a second per step. Most people will tend to walk around there unless they're walking more quickly or more slowly, like taking a stroll versus a quick jog. So this is kind of a standard rate. But on top of that, we also have a nice, quick way of breaking down our shot. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more as we go into the spline process. But essentially, when you're ready to go into splines, what you want to do is have enough keys and enough information so that everything works correctly and Maya isn't throwing a bunch of stuff at you that you don't need. And usually 2 to 4 frames is a good range for that when you're first starting out. So having a key every 2 to 4 frames. That'll make sure that when you go into splines, you're not meeting any weird random expectations. Does it always have to be that? No, but it's a good starting point. And in this case, we are right at 3, right in the middle here. So very nice. So how do we start this out? Well, first, I'm just going to take all my controls here, hit S to set a key. Now, as we're having this character walk, I do want to get my character ready for the walk. And one of the first things that I like to do when I'm animating a character is I like to animate the character with knee PVs turned on. So I'm going to turn these on right here. Knee PVs are essentially controls that allow you to point where the knee looks at, right there. Now, you don't have to animate with this. I know a lot of people who actually don't like animating with them, and instead they will use the leg twist attribute or something like that. The reason I like to work with these is that I feel like you tend to have a lot more control with them. Specifically because when you have these on, the knees will always point to that. So I know exactly where the knee direction is. But on top of that, if I move these very far away, let's actually do one compared to the other. So let's move this one over here. I have a lot more control over the knee. So let's take this control here. It's right next to the knee. If I move it left or right, see how much the knee wiggles around right there? I just do a small change and we get a big knee wave right in there. But this one, which is very, very far away, way over there, if I move that left or right, see how tiny those knee motions are. I'm having to move that control way off to the side, and it's a tiny little move. Let's actually move them both together. See that? How one knee is just crushing in on itself and bending in, while the other one just has these tiny little motions. By using the knee PV and then moving out further away from the character, essentially what I'm doing is I'm giving myself more control, more ease of polish on this character. Now, the other thing I'll do is I'll switch the space to be master space. Space on a rig is usually what does the control follow. So in this case, if I leave it on foot space, as I move the foot, you'll notice that that PV moves as well. I don't usually like that personally. I usually like to have the PV stay still. That way, as I move the foot, that PV just stays there, and then I can adjust the PV where I want. So this is a personal preference. Do not feel like you need to do this. It is just something I like, and I'm going to set this to 100. It's going to nice round number. What the heck am I typing? 100. There we go. This is a personal preference. If you prefer to keep them in foot space, great. If you prefer to use the leg twist, great. Don't feel like you have to do it in one way or the other. As long as it works, that's the important bit. And Animated Paul, I can answer that question in a little bit here about head jittering during a walk cycle. Just remind me later and we can dive into that, because a lot of it will apply to what's happening underneath here. So we've got the knee PVs in place. I took everything and I set a key on my character. At this point, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to go into my first contact pose, which is usually where we start on a walk. Instead, I'm going to just pose the character. Imagine posing them out to be in a comfortable position, not in their just neutral T pose. Imagine if the character actually had arms, they would be in the T pose. I'm going to make a comfortable pose for the character. So in this case, what that means is taking the feet, and I'm just going to move them in right here. So how would this character stand? The feet would be out a little bit more, like so. The character would stand up straight, maybe with a slight bend to their knee right there. And we have something like that. Now, ideally, if this was a natural stance, you'd also shift the weight one side to the other, but we're not going to worry about that right now because we're going right into the walk. So right here, this would be a natural stance for this character to take. And usually when we're standing, our legs have a slight forward lean just because we're balancing on our foot, which is a big paddle. So when you have your character here, our legs are not straight down like this. Because if you think of your body mass, your weight of the whole body here, that would be putting all of the weight only on the tip of the ball of the heel there. That's not good. Someone could just push you, and you'd fall over backwards. Instead, we tend to stand with our feet back here. You can think of this curve of the body kind of continuing right through there. And we stand like this. Because now our body weight is in the middle towards the ball of our foot right here. And this makes it so that we're much more balanced on the back because we've got all of this to keep us up. And we've also got our toes in the ball of our foot to catch our weight forward. So this is going to be a much more naturally balanced pose with the legs slightly back while we're standing. And the straight line you get is on the back hamstrings here. So you get kind of this rhythm right through there. This kind of S pose right through there. So with that in mind, we can have that character just standing here. A little bit of a lean forward. Great. There we go. This gives us a good starting point. Now, you could go further with this if you wanted. You could bring those feet like as far in as you want. Really make it tight, make it wider. Honestly, it's up to you. I'm going to probably bring it in just a little bit more. Right around there. Okay. Cool. So, with this, we've got our first pose. Let's actually get that first step in. And the first step, honestly, is probably the trickiest one. Because how far do the feet go forward? Do they just take a tiny step this far, looking at the side view here? Do they just do that? Do they step out that far? Where do we go? What's going to feel natural? And honestly, it's tricky. In general, for most people, we tend to take a step that is a foot length distance. So you take the length of your foot, there'd be a gap, and then your other foot. That would be the typical stride. Again, it's like a vanilla stride. It's what the average is. So in this case, if I was to take a polygon cube, for example, I don't usually do this when I'm animating a walk. But I could measure this out here, measure the size of that foot, put it there, and then the other foot would be here for a standard walk. Now, does this always apply? No, because especially when you're doing cartoons, you could be dealing with characters with very big changes. In this case, we've got a character with big giant clown feet. So that stride length is going to be way further. You could have a character with tiny little baby feet. In this case, their strides would be super tiny. No, you'd still want those legs to be doing a lot of the work. If you think of Sora from Kingdom Hearts, if anyone remembers his feet, they're huge. They're like the length of his leg. If he took a normal stride, he'd be doing squats and lunges forward because his feet are just so long. No, he's got this very wide-legged walk instead. So this is a guide, a place to kind of give yourself a start, but don't feel like it's a must that you have to do this. Instead, what I usually look for is the angle of the legs. So let's say we'll start here. We'll bring that foot forward and bring the character forward here. Already you can see that the character is going to have to lunge forward for this. It's too much. There's no way that I can connect both the front and the back leg here correctly. So I'm going to try and avoid doing that. And I just realized I moved that foot. So this is actually another good point. When you're moving the character forward, make sure you're moving them forward in world space, not object space. Because I took those feet and I angled them this way, as I move it forward here, look at the front view. See how that foot is going out an angle? You want to make sure that you're moving it in world mode, so that way it goes perfectly straight right here. Now, how far should it go forward? In this case, there's not really a specific value that I'm going to go for, but like somewhere around here, I feel like it's a little narrower than a full stride should be good. And as we go through the rest of the pose, we're always going to be referring back to this and like double checking. Now, for the sake of math, I'm going to set this to a value of 10 right here, because I think I'm pretty close. I never do this in an actual assignment or in an actual animation where I set specific values unless I'm doing something that has to be like input into a game engine. Normally, like for a character shot or a film shot, who cares what the value is? In this case, I'm going to set it to a value of 10. I'm going to round it out because it's going to make it easier to explain some of the things later on. Just keep in mind that's not a normal thing to do. Okay, so contact pose. We've got our leg separation here. That's probably going to be the biggest thing, and don't be afraid of revisiting this stride length when you need to. What else do we need? Well, let's start with the feet. So the front foot, this is the contact pose, the moment that the heel touches the ground, which means that we're going to have foot roll right in here. So this foot is going to come up right there. Now, additionally, when your foot contacts the ground, typically your toes are going to be rotated up ever so slightly. I like to put this in because it helps avoid that just perfectly flat line of the bottom of the foot, which tends to look a little robotic. Doesn't have to be much. You don't have to do this. This would make it look like very big clown feet, which he does have. So we've got that. And I'm just going to put this in quickly, but without worrying too much about the exact angle, because there are so many other things that I'm missing that it doesn't really matter. I'm just kind of putting it in super quick. The back foot, what's going to happen is the foot is rolling upwards right here. So we're going to be getting this motion of the heel coming up. Now, this is where a lot of students will have issues with both of these rotations, because which attribute do you use? Do you use the foot roll or do you use the rotate X? So for example, I could zero this out here and I could just roll the character's foot up this way. Same thing. Well, why would I use foot roll when I could just rotate the foot? Because when the foot is on the ground, you want to use foot roll. It usually tends to work better on most rigs. The reason for that is when the foot is on the ground, if I use rotate X and I want to peel the heel up, I get this. Not great. Which now means I have to move the foot up, and then I have to use ball roll to flatten out those toes. And oh shoot, I need to raise that up a little higher. Great, it went through the floor again. And now I'm going to have sliding, and I'm going to have popping, and it's going to be a pain. Foot roll is built to avoid that. So I just go, whoop, there we go, done. I'm going to raise that up. And on the front foot, technically I could use rotate X on this rig. Most rigs though, you're going to want to use foot roll. So I'm going to get into that habit right away. Foot roll whenever the foot is on the ground. That's my general rule. So we're going to go something like that. The front foot, I want it to be a little bit lower than the back foot, just so I don't want the same angle here and here. That would just kind of look boring. Okay, so those are the feet. Honestly, the feet are pretty simple. We've put them in, we've angled them out, we've got your foot rolls. Great. We're off to a solid start here. How about the body? Well, the body is going to have a few different things, and essentially we can just break it down into each individual attribute. So again, this is where you want to understand what we're looking at and why we're moving a certain thing. What we don't want to do is just go, okay, just move them. Rotate, yay, there we go. No, why is it happening? What are we doing? And the goal here is that we want the front leg to be stretched straight, not stretched where it's separated back out like this, but just straight. And the back leg should be bent. This gives us power to walk. And this is incorporating the locked knee principle. If we have both legs straight like this, technically that can work, but it tends to make walks very poppy and very mechanical because, as you can see, it just makes this A-frame just perfectly straight. Not interesting. If we bend the front leg and then straighten the back leg, now it feels like the character is almost anticipating the ground. It's like, touch the ground. No, when we touch the ground, we stretch out, we reach for the ground and contact. That way we have control over our walk. So we're going to have that nice straight leg on the front, bent leg on the back. Cool. So that's going to be most of our translate Y and Z is going to be focused on that. Let's look at the translate X, side to side motion. We're going to dive into this a lot more as we go, but side to side motion is balance. So if we think of our balance here and just think of a simple shot, you have your character here and they're standing like this with this foot up in the air. Are they balanced? No, they're not. The reason being, most of their mass is away from their balance point. So for any of you in ANO1, you're going to be doing animation poses and pose tests. Balance is a very important part of that, and this applies here. So this is the start of when I was saying all the previous assignments build up into the vanilla walk. This is one of them. Your posing assignment is right here. We need to balance this character out. Now, on a contact pose, the foot isn't up in the air, it's on the ground. Right here, touching the ground. But keep in mind, this is the moment that the heel has touched the ground. Nothing has happened yet. There's no weight on this leg yet because it has just touched the ground. That means that most of the body weight is still going to be balanced over the supporting leg back here, which means that the body is going to be over this way on the contact pose. Now this is a big extreme pose here, like that. But you're going to have that weight further over top of the supporting leg, and then it'll switch over right through here. So I'm just going to take that weight and just shift it over right there. So with that, if I just do this, there we go. We've got our pose, right? No, because I forgot all the rotations. I didn't apply the rotations in here. When you're thinking of a pose, you need to think of everything. The translations, the rotations. Look through all of this and choose, do I need this now? What's happening and why? So let's just break this down. Rotate X, that's the nod. In this case, on the contact pose, the character, this is going to be more, it's going to make more sense when we keep animating this. But as the character is dropping, they're going from their up pose. So we're going contact down, passing up, contact. So it's up high, dropping down. When you drop down, your nose will want to drag. So the easy way to imagine this is imagine the Bolly rig here. Right there, the body. Just give him a big nose on the front there. Like that. And there you go. Giant big nose. And as they walk, it's going to be the overlap of that head. So rotate X, in this case, is going to be up ever so slightly as they come through. There we go. Rotate Y, that's the twist in this case. Well, that's going to be very important because the twist is the sympathetic motion of the character. Once again, all your posing assignments that you've done up to this point, when you reach this, everything is coming in here. So if I was to reach, for example, with my arm forward this way, see how my whole body twists there so that we get that nice extension right through there. If I didn't, I just get to reach like this and it feels very awkward and kind of mechanical. No, you get that sympathetic motion. Our body is helping that motion happen. So in this case, if that leg is forward, well, those hips, I'm going to set this to object mode here in my rotation. Those hips are also going to help. We're going to get this. If that leg is forward, that hip should be forward. Right there. Okay. Now, from there, we go into the rotate Z. That's this side. Tilt. What's happening here? Okay, so we're going to have to take a step back and explain another concept here. And all of this, and we haven't even done one pose, but this is why we need to understand what we're looking at and not just move things randomly. So when we're moving our hips and rocking side to side, there's many more variations, but in general, we can break it down into two different things. A lazy walk, technically is energy efficient walk, but lazy is easier to write, or energetic. Okay. Double check I spelled that right. So you have a lazy walk and an energetic walk. And essentially it just describes what is happening with our hips. For many of you, you've heard me talk about this many times already. So the same thing as before, but if anyone's new, hopefully this will be helpful. So a lazy walk is the most energy efficient walk. Essentially, if you imagine a character is standing here and they lift this leg right here, which way would their hips tilt? With a lazy walk, it would tilt down. And the way you can kind of think about this is just think of a block of wood sitting on two other blocks of wood here. And then you remove one of the blocks of wood right there. What happens to the top piece of wood? It falls because it has no support. It's not putting any energy. It's just going to drop down. That's what's happening here on a lazy walk. When we have no support on that side, our body drops down. There we go. Now, an energetic walk is the opposite. If we lift that leg up here, the hips raise up. Okay. Why? Why is it doing that? Honestly, it's sympathetic action. Same thing as when the hips are rotating forward as the leg goes forward. The hips are now rotating up as the leg goes up. And the way you can kind of think about this is imagine your character stepping on a giant box or a big step. If their hip is down here and they're going to reach up, that would be very awkward. Like you can even do this yourself with your arms if you can. Like tilt down and then try to reach up for something. It's going to be very awkward. Instead, you tilt in the direction that your arm is going so that you can reach higher. That's what our legs are doing. As our leg is going up, our hips are helping that motion. So that's an energetic walk. Now, they're not going to be this extreme and big rotations, but it's a very important concept because this is going to influence what we're doing with that rotate Z. Now, if we have enough time today, I'm going to be doing both of these. I'm going to show the difference in how they feel and how they look. But for now, I'm going to go with a lazy walk because that tends to be the easier one to animate, but also this is debatable, but it tends to be the more average walk, unless you're putting energy. Like when I'm thinking of walk, I'm thinking of the most vanilla, boring walk. A character is just walking with no personality to them. To me, adding energy in there is starting to add personality. There's a reason why they're being energetic. So typical vanilla walks, I always aim towards more of the lazy walk for the absolute most vanilla flavor. So in this case, contact pose. Which way do the hips go? Well, again, keep in mind that the contact foot here has no weight on it. This is the moment that the foot has touched the ground. So if there's no weight in there, there's no support there, all the weight is being supported on that back leg, the hips will be down on that side because it hasn't reacted yet. It was dragging. So something like this. Let's keep it a little bit more subtle right in there. So again, this kind of goes back to that question that we had earlier about how do you animate things without reference? you understand the body mechanics. You understand why something would happen the way it does. This is also how you animate faster. Based on one of the other questions I got asked earlier, is that by understanding why you're doing any of these things, you can now make it a whole lot easier to place it in and have it correct right away, because you know why you're doing it, and not just moving things and hoping for the best, only to find out halfway through animating that, oh shoot, I was completely wrong. So with that, we've got our base, and we've went through all of our translates and rotates here. Now, squash and stretch, I'll save that for later. Squash and stretch is something we can add in as a polish element. We don't need it now. So from there, let's just get the legs to have that nice straight on the front and bend on the back right here. I'm just playing around a little bit with my translate Z and Y, just to get that nice line here, right there. There we go. There's our first pose. It took a while, but we thought through everything. Now, does this mean that this pose is done and we're never going to touch it again? No. It just means that we have the base in there, and then from there we can come back and refine it. No pose in animation is done. It's always in progress. Okay, so we've got that. Let's go to our next pose. Passing pose. So this is going to be 3 frames later. I'm going to take all my curves here. S to set a key. Passing pose is a very important pose. To me, it is... Sorry, passing pose. Down pose. I'm skipping a whole thing. So first, down pose. I was too excited. Passing pose is one of my favorites, honestly. We have to go to the down pose first. So contact, down. Then we go into passing. So down pose is when the body hits the ground and all of our weight comes down. Think of a bouncing ball. That's essentially what we're doing here. Our body is acting like a bouncing ball and going through. So this would be the contact of a bouncing ball where the ball comes down. The only difference is we have knees and feet to absorb the shock. So that bounce is going to be a little bit softer. So for a down pose, usually what I'll do is take the front foot and I'll just flatten it out on the ground. There we go. Done. Nice, quick, easy. Don't need to do anything else. The back foot is going to roll up. Just keep going upwards here as the character's essentially pushing themselves forward. And then the body's going to come down here. Now, just a note on this back foot. Some people will raise that foot up off the ground by the down pose. This is not incorrect. It just really depends on the style of walking that a person has. So you don't necessarily have to keep it on the ground. I tend to like it to keep it on the ground here, or at least like partially on the ground where the toes are still pushing off, mostly because it adds more weight to the character. The faster that foot comes off of the ground, the lighter the character is going to feel because they don't have that energy to push forward. Yeah. So this is something where looking at reference is very important. But we're just going to roll that up here for now. Okay, now the body. What happens with the body? Well, once again, let's just think through every attribute and think why is something happening and what should be happening. So let's start from the top. Translate X, side to side motion. We went from our contact pose here. The body weight, translate X, was over top of the supporting leg. Now it's coming down here. And what's happening is all of our weight is being placed into the front foot now. As you can see, like if I push this even further, all of that weight is over here. This back foot is now just pushing up and getting off of the ground. That means that most of our weight is going to shift over. And we're going to have this big sweep across right here onto the other leg, onto the now front leg supporting leg right there. Okay. Translate Y and Z. Well, translate Y definitely needs to be lower than the contact pose right here. I'm going to make sure that that goes down right there. Now you can go pretty far, honestly, with this. You don't have to just keep it super subtle. the more up and down you have, the more weight your character is going to have. So I'm going to exaggerate this quite a bit here. Translate Z, I would just push this in a way that this leg here is not perfectly straight. See that? How you get that perfect straight line there? Ugh. As much as I can, I will try to avoid any perfectly vertical and horizontal lines in my shot. So I'm going to have a little bit of that forward lean. Again, keep in mind that a walk is a controlled fall. We're leaning forward. If the angle of the leg is like this, that means that the character is trying to hit the brakes. They're trying to stop. So I'm going to lean that forward ever so slightly right there. So we have that. So that's our translate X, Y, and Z. Okay, rotate X, Y, and Z. Rotate X. At this point, the nose is going to start to come down right here. So we're going to lower this a little bit. So as they come down, their nose is starting to overlap down, and then they're going to drag a little bit as they come up here. So we've got that in place. Rotate Y. Now we've got that lean of that rotation of the body here. What's going to happen? Well, in this case, the character is now pushing forward. So this back leg here is pushing forward through here. What's that going to do with the hips? It's going to push that hip forward as well. Because if this was dragging here, going this way, what that means is that this leg is pushing forward while that hip of the same leg is pushing backwards and like compressing the knee. That would be very strange. Instead, as this pushes forward, the leg and the hip is also going to start pushing forward as well and kind of pulling that leg along with. Everything is helping that forward motion right there. And then our rotate Z, that's the tilt. It hits the ground. We're doing a lazy walk. So imagine just a plank of wood that gets dropped and it hits like that. So if we think of our plank of wood, we now have this support right here. And this leg is kind of not working as much anymore. So what we're going to get is this reversal where before, let's exaggerate this here, we had this where it's down on this side. And now here, boom, we're going to have that reversal because all of the weight is being pushed up from this now supporting leg, taking that weight in there. Okay, so we get that. And you can see how that translate X and rotate Z both have a big change from the contact to the down. This is very important because that's our weight shift right in there. If we don't have that, we're going to miss out on the feeling of weight. Does that mean every walk has this? No. But it is a standard that we can use as a base to understand how the weight shifts will change depending on the walk. So we can kind of use that as a base right there. Okay, so that's the down pose. Once again, what did we do? We took every attribute and we tried to understand what is happening here as we're posing through, thinking through the animation and using our posing and all of our animation knowledge that we've gotten up to this point to put things in place, especially posing at this point. You'll notice that we haven't really done anything like the bouncing ball principle or the pendulum principle in this case, because we're not really moving things yet. Like we're building up to it, but at this point we're really just working with poses. Thanks for the reminder here. Okay, so now we get to the passing pose. Like I said earlier, the passing pose is probably my favorite pose for a walk cycle. And it is a pose that I will usually call the linchpin pose. So that's going to be 3 frames later from our down pose. And the reason that I like the passing pose is because it tells us so much about the walk and is essentially what allows us to have a structure to the walk that is very defined. And the reason for that is because on a passing pose, usually the foot on the ground is flat. So that's done right there. And then the body like we were talking about earlier, needs to be slightly ahead to get that walking feeling. So if I look at that supporting leg and it's angled this way, I know that's not correct. That would mean the character is walking backwards. If it's perfectly vertical here, that's not correct because now the character is just standing in place like a flamingo. I want that forward lean. So it gives me a very clear structure of what is supposed to happen here. So I can move my body there just for now. Let's get this foot up though. So the front foot stays in place, no problem. The back foot now needs to raise up. It is passing. That's why it's called a passing pose. The back leg is passing and is going to become the front leg here. So we're getting this. So the foot's going to be in the air. When the foot is in the air, I will always zero out my foot roll right there. And now I am using only rotations, no foot roll. The reason for this is because it's going to make it much easier to get natural motions to your walk, as well as nice clean arcs in your movement right there. Okay. So I'm just going to do this. What I want to avoid is crossing the leg right here through the knee like this. That's just going to make a bad silhouette. So I'm going to push this here. Now, another common thing that I will see in a lot of walks is a pose like this. And this angle to the leg here is something you want to avoid in most creatures, or humanoids, I will say. So see here how the angle of the leg is pointing down like this. You're going from the leg and then down to the heel right there. This would break your ankle. And the reason being is that you have your Achilles tendon on the back of your foot. It's a big tendon. And it allows our foot to push off the ground. Like imagine going on tiptoes. Right on your tiptoes. That Achilles tendon is the thing that's helping to bring everything up, and it supports a lot of weight. It's a very powerful tendon. And to bend it like this would crack your ankle and crack that tendon. So usually what you want is to look at the angle of the back leg and at most have a straight line, or if a character is relaxed, have a little bit of a bend this way. See how now I'm getting that kind of angle right here on the back of the leg? That's what I want. If I don't have that, it means that I've somehow broken something. So I'm going to go somewhere around there. And then I'm going to use the ball roll since the foot is now in the air, and I'm going to go up, not down. A lot of people will do this when they start animating a walk, and they roll the toes down. Our toes don't roll down usually. Maybe for one frame, the very moment that the foot leaves the ground. But if we did this, imagine like accidentally bring your foot down too early. You're just going to scrape your toenails across the ground. It's going to be very painful. Our toes are designed to point upwards like this, so that if we accidentally hit the ground, we don't go like that. That would be very painful. If you look at most shoe designs, the toes curl upwards. There's always an upwards curl there. So we want to avoid just dragging the toes too long. It makes the characters look like they have wet socks. And this time I don't use the foot roll since it's not flat on the ground. Yeah, so in this case, when the foot is in the air, I use 0 foot roll because it's going to make it much easier to pose out with all of my rotations here, just rotating into place while it's in the air versus dealing with foot roll and having to deal with like, okay, I'm using rotate X and Z here, but also a little bit of foot roll. And then there's going to be this other rotation and they're counter animating each other. And I can actually show this here. Look at the pivot point of the heel right here. See how it's right at the heel? So if I move the foot, it pivots from there. But if I'm using foot roll and rotation, look at where the pivot point is. Just random space. And the more I push this, the more I'm going to just get these random results that no longer line up to anything. Because I'm using 2 sets of controls that are moving the same thing. So what I want to do is use whichever one is most ideal for the situation. When the foot is on the ground, that's foot roll, because that works the best. For example here, let's take this foot. If I roll it forward, hey, it's still on the heel. If I roll it or back, it's still on the heel. If I roll it forward, now it's on the toes. That's how our foot should work when it's on the ground. If I use rotations, it works only one way, doesn't work the other way. So that's not great. If the foot's in the air, if I use rotation, hey, that rotates. Perfect. If I use foot roll, hey, that's rotating. Oh, there's some sort of invisible wall that the character's foot is on. That's weird. So once again, it works in one direction but not the other. And that can just be very messy. It's a pain to clean up. Using one or the other, it just makes it much easier, in my opinion. I know some animators who will only ever use foot roll. I know some animators who only use rotations, which that's just asking for a lot of counter animation. But honestly, as long as you're comfortable with it, that's the important thing. In my case, I like to switch back and forth because then I know exactly what should happen at any time. And we're going to see that in the polishing phase here. Okay, so we've got the foot in the air here, but there is something that we're forgetting. And that is that we moved it in the side view, but what happens in the front view? The foot is in the air now. It can actually move in and out. And honestly, this really just depends on your walk. So what you want to think about here is, how would our feet move? We don't move on a track and just do this from the front view. Instead, our feet are there, and as I walk, my feet are going to either move in an arc like this from the front view, or if you're walking with your feet very close together, they're going to walk outwards, because otherwise you just kick yourself. So you're going to do something like this, or if your feet are a little bit wider, something like this as you walk. So in this case, the feet are wide enough that I'm going to go inwards right here. So that foot is actually going to translate X in that direction. Okay, cool. Done. No, because now there's still rotations. Our foot does not just point straight to the ground at all times. It's not magnetized to the ground. If you look at that foot here, look at the line of the foot right here. See how that's just perfectly straight down to the ground? That's not natural. Our foot will drag. And if you think of how you step, you push off of your toe, and your toe is the last thing to leave the ground. So your foot is going to be pointing back to where it was. This is the Taylor assignment. Think of the Taylor assignment, how the tail points back to where it used to be. Same thing. So again, now we're starting to use some of those animation concepts from what we learned before. So I look at the toes here, and I'm just going to take that foot, dip, right there. Now we've got that more natural angle in there, and we're going to have a step that feels much more interesting versus just dip down. Not only that, but our ankle tends to line up with our lower leg. So right here, I'm going to exaggerate this. What we don't want is this. See here how you get the angle of the lower leg and then the foot at this weird angle. That's not right. The way our bone structure works is you've got two bones. Is those little bony nubs on each side of your ankle. That is basically a horseshoe. Let me just draw it out here. So you've got your kind of foot structure here. Right there. And you've got two bones for your lower leg that come down. And those two bones wrap around your ankle here. And then the other side like this. And that holds your foot to your leg, is this kind of horseshoe shape that sits over top of your foot. That means that our ankle, it doesn't really rotate very well side to side like this. We can, but when it's relaxed, it's going to just be kind of held by all the tendons in more of a straight line. Otherwise, it looks kind of broken. So if we kind of keep that in mind, if we look at this here, see how it's got that weird angle? That's a little odd. We'll just straighten that out. That's more natural. Now, do you have to be super precise about this? No, but just rough. And we're going to see this a lot more in the next pose and how it's important. So we now have that foot in place. And again, we're thinking through why things should be happening. Now, when you're first starting out, this is a lot of information. This is not stuff that you're expected to know like right off the bat. Yeah, you're going to know all of this stuff. No, but you want to try to pay attention to this. And this is where analyzing reference and paying attention to anatomy and posing and all of your animation details to this point is going to help you. So let's go back to the body. And once again, it's the same thing. Think through your attributes. Translate X. What's happening? Well, the body has just swung across. So now what we're thinking of is the pendulum. So we get this big whew on the down pose. It goes forward into the up or the passing pose. It's a pendulum. So it's going to keep easing in on that side that it just swung through whew, across. So we get that nice swing and ease. Pendulum assignment. Translate Y and Z. We already did this to move the character in place. I think I'm leaning a little too far forward here. And try not to overstretch the leg. Usually I try to keep a little bit of a bend in there. Like the teeniest, tiniest bip bend. So rotations. Rotate X. As the character's pushing up, their nose is going to drag. So you get that kind of pull downwards right here. I'm going to drag that a little bit right through there. Rotate Y. This is the thing that I tend to see most wrong with the passing pose is that the hip is going to be behind like so. So you can see that this hip here is behind the other one. That's not correct usually because this leg is passing. That's the one that's moving ahead. If you think of the sympathetic action, if that leg is passing, that hip should also be passing ever so slightly. I'm going to push that forward ahead just a little bit here. It doesn't have to be much, but just a little bit. The other thing I never want to have is anything zeroed out. So if I put this pose here, rotate Y 0, no. That's going to make your character feel very mechanical and just, it's going to look weird. So you want at least a little bit of motion in there. And then rotate Z. Once again, think of a pendulum. The character's hips have just swung downwards. What's going to happen? Are they going to bounce and just go bonk off the ground like this? No. They're going to ease in like a pendulum. You hit the ground, hold, and then it's going to come back up. So here, we're going to push that down a little bit more. Right through there. Okay. Now, from there, we've got pretty much everything in place. But there's one actual thing that I like to do on my passing poses nowadays. Is I actually like to have the knee bent ever so slightly for the passing pose. Right here. So I'm not a fan of straightening it. Now, this might feel a little odd because, well, shouldn't the passing pose be straight? We talked about how we as creatures straighten our legs and all of this stuff. Yes, and you will see some people who do walk like this. But the problem is that we are starting to exaggerate our motions quite a bit versus a human walk. Namely, the down pose right here. And because we're pushing this so far down, we're getting a big knee bend here. So if we straighten this up right away, what you will usually get is some sort of weird locked knee feeling, which is what we're getting right here. See how that knee doesn't move at all, almost? You're going to get that, or you're going to get some sort of weird snap where the knee goes from really bent right into a straight. And that can feel very strange. So by having that a little bit of a knee bend in here, it doesn't have to be much. We're still going to feel that straightening from the big bend of the down into the passing pose, but we're going to avoid any leg snap and also knee pops, which if any of you have done walks before, you know the nightmare of knee pops. So this is going to help avoid that before we even get there. Okay. So we've got one more pose to do, and then we start the cycle all over again. So the next pose here is the up pose. And of all the poses, this is the one that I see most often with mistakes to it. And for anyone who's gotten a critique from me on a up pose, you probably know exactly what I'm going to talk about. But in general, what I will see on an up pose is the foot on the ground is going to roll up like so. Aha, because we want to go high. We want to get as much height as possible. So you're going to get this. And then the foot that's moving forward is going to be up here. Because we're going up. Everything is going up. Wrong. This is going to give your walk the feeling of a march. Because we don't walk like this. We're energy efficient. This would take a lot of energy to raise your leg up and put it down. Raise your leg up, put it down. Not only that, but standing on our tiptoes all the time, that's a huge pain. We don't do this on most up poses. If you actually study a lot of walks, most people never go up on their toes on an up pose. Their foot stays flat on the ground. Now, why do we see this mistake repeated so many times for Vanilla Walk? It is The Illusion of Life. The Illusion of Life, which is my favorite animation book of all time, and definitely a book, if you haven't gotten it yet, I recommend you get it. It's a great book for learning animation. But there's two things in the animation survival guide that survival kit, animator survival kit, by Richard Williams. There's two things that I don't agree with. And it's more of a misconception that it's not that they got it wrong. It's just a misconception because of the way it's written. So in this case, what they were showing in the illustrations is a vanilla walk, a walk cycle, but a cartoony walk cycle. It is not a pure vanilla body mechanics cycle. And they're really exaggerating their poses and their drawings to show the contrast in them. It doesn't mean that that's how those poses should be on every walk cycle. It's just a cartoony representation. In this case, what we're going to end up with is more of a march. So we need to think of what's actually happening. The second thing in the animated survival kit that I'm not going to get into now because I've done whole rants on this is don't listen to music while you're animating. I always listen to music when I'm animating. If you like listening to music, if it helps you, listen to music. That's when he was saying don't listen to music, that's not what he meant. Or that's not how it should be taken. But again, I did a whole talk on that before, so I'm not going to get into it now. So how should this up pose work? Well, the big thing is that the foot is going to stay pretty close to the ground. This is important for two reasons. One, it's just going to look weird that the character is bouncing off of the ground. But two, and more importantly, when we go into our contact pose here, that heel needs to raise up. If our heel is already way up here on an up pose, that means it's going to have to go up, stop, then keep going, which is going to ruin the feeling of a walk. It's going to feel like a stumble or some sort of like sneak. The heel should move in a nice clean arc here. So by keeping it low or even flat, we're going to make that much easier to do. So that's huge. So we're going to keep that low. The second thing is that the foot passing forward here stays low to the ground because we are very lazy creatures and our feet just skim the ground really close. And this is also one of the reasons why you want your foot and your toes to angle upwards. So instead of having that really high angle, we're going to get something a little bit more like this, where that foot is just like centimeters off the ground. Now, does everyone walk like this? No. But if you look at most people, we don't raise our feet very high. And I had this experience, and I've told this story before, when I was helping out at a cancer relay. So basically people walking to raise money for cancer. I was a photographer there, helping out and kind of volunteering. And during the circuit, which was just walking around a block, there was part of the sidewalk that was ever so slightly cracked. It just had the tiniest little like that in the sidewalk. Everyone tripped on it. So many people fell and hurt themselves because of this tiny little offset in the sidewalk. They actually had to coordinate it all off and put cones and tape and everything because so many people were tripping. And it wasn't like it was a big drop or anything. It was like the tiniest little offset. But when people are walking, especially for a long time, you're not going to be doing these big high steps. So your toes will catch very easily on things. It's why we stumble, why we stub our toes on everything. So you want to be very conscious of that. We are energy efficient. Again, think of the Terminator. The Terminator is not going to walk with high knees going through the streets, going after Sarah Connor. No, it's going to be a very efficient walk that just keeps going and never stops. And it might be a silly question, but is the same if the character's wearing heels? Yes, the heel will stay, or the toes will stay low. And as for the toe push off, it's the same thing. You're not going to get this big up pose or this big angle change. The mechanics will stay pretty much the same thing. The real big difference with heels, there's mechanical changes throughout, but the big one is the contact. Because some people, when they walk on heels, they don't contact on the heel and then go forward because the heel is so thin. So they'll do like a toe step as they walk. Or they will contact on the heel, but because the heel is a little round point and not the back of a foot, it's going to give a slightly different arc to the way the character puts their foot down. And the weight shift is going to be a little different because they don't want to crack the heel. That's really the biggest difference. Aside from that, most of the mechanics stay pretty similar. So with the up pose, we've got the foot here. Now let's keep thinking through the different elements of the foot. So it's going forward. We had it angled in because it steps up, pushes off of the foot, angles inwards here. So what's going to happen? Well, it's going to still arc in probably a little bit because it's swinging through and forward right there. Or vice versa, we can maybe start swinging it back out. This is where, honestly, it's up to you. There's no real, like, you have to do it this way. We just want a nice clean arc of that foot in the Translate X right there. So I'm going to keep it nice and subtle here. And then also rotate that ankle so it's in line with the lower leg right there. Again, we don't want something like this. That's going to feel weird and broken. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just kind of get it in line here a little bit. And it's going to make a huge difference. There we go. So there's our feet. And you can see here how as that foot steps forward now, instead of feeling like a march, we get that kind of swoop of the foot. But not only that, we are getting something that I love in animation and something I try to put into my shots as much as I can. I should bring the body down a little bit here. Which is, we are getting contrasting motion. Contrasting motion is when you have something happening in two different directions. So I'm just right here getting my Translate Y to work a little bit better. So contrasting motion would be, for example, if I have everything, let's just do the hand and the head. If everything moves together, this feels boring. But if I have a moment where they separate and then come in, like that feels more dynamic. That feels cooler. And you can have something like this where the head goes down and the hand comes up to shield yourself. It creates a more interesting, powerful motion. So here, what we're getting is the foot raises up here with the body, but now as the body keeps going up, the foot goes down. So you have this kind of separation of the two versus everything just kind of stepping together and feeling robotic. So not only is it more physically accurate, not only is it more of a walk, it just feels better animation wise. So highly recommend this. Now for the body, same mechanics as we were doing before. So we already did our translations and everything, Y and Z. So let's do our X. At the X pose here, usually for the up pose, I like to kind of ease in. So we had that swing, ease to a stop right through there before it'll start to come back. So we're going to do that. So a little bit more to the side there. I think I can push this foot a little bit more too. Yeah. So here, what I'm thinking about with the foot is if I push it a little further this way, inwards, on the passing pose, on the up pose, I can start to swing it outwards here. And that's going to create that nice contrasting motion where the foot is going screen right while the body is going screen left. And that's just going to create a nice dynamic flow in there. So thinking of animation principles going through here. But now let's look at the rotations. So rotate X, as the body comes up here, it's going to start to straighten out right through there. So starting to come up. Our rotate Z here is still going to be angling downwards. So it's still dragging all of that weight of the leg coming down right through here. And then the rotate Y, that leg is forward. So we definitely need to push this forward here a little bit. Now, this is a good question. Do you sometimes look at your curves or is it going to be later? Typically when I'm working, I will always be looking at my curves in the graph editor. I always have my graph editor open. In this case, I don't have it open because I want to be able to see everything else and I want everyone else to see all the details. But I usually have the graph editor open so that I can make sure that I'm not getting any weird bumps or wiggles in my curves. So for example, let's say the translate Y. If my translate Y was doing this, in the graph editor, I could easily see like, this is my contact down. Okay, that's down. Passing, it went up higher. Oh, the up pose is lower than the passing. Oh, that's not right. With this open, I can see very clearly, yes, this is higher. It's not the same level. It's not lower. Good. I have it where I need it to be. Not only that, but I find that the graph editor just gives me more finesse to clean things up. So I always like to have it open when I'm working, but for demo purposes, usually it just takes up a lot of space. So we're not going to worry too much about it. And actually, do I want to? Let's do this. Because we don't really need our perspective view. No, I do need it because I do show stuff in there. Okay, we're going to keep going like this, and then we're going to open up the graph editor later. So at this point, we've got all of our poses right in here. Yay! We're good. Now we need to repeat the animation. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, we could do it the manual way, which the manual way is not a bad thing to do, especially when you're learning. It's a good thing to do. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to set a key on this, and we're going to get that contact foot on the ground. So this foot here, let's zero out the rotations, except for the rotate Y, because that's, in this case, the angle of the foot here. Put it down on the ground, and then use foot roll to go up. Now, how far forward do I go? This is the tricky part when you're doing it the manual way. I don't know how far forward so that I have an even step and it's not like one step is really long and the other steps are really short and I create this weird limp. Well, this is where you can look at your values. Normally in animation, I try not to look at my values too much. And the Animated Rose, thank you so much for the raid. Hey, welcome everyone. Welcome to the stream. We're doing a vanilla walk analysis / concept here. But welcome. Hello. And Kyle, my pleasure. Hopefully the help was helpful. And if you ever do have other questions, feel free to ask anytime. Visual Toad, hello. So for the foot roll here, we need to get that step distance working in here. How do we do that? Again, like I was saying earlier, I don't like dealing with math in animation as much as I can because it's an art form. I don't want to be dealing with spreadsheets and math and all these numbers and trying to remember all these numbers. No. But we can at least use a little bit to get a starting point. So for this, what I just need to know is the distance between my front foot and my back foot on my first pose. So right here, if I look at this foot here, my translate Z value, let's actually just zero this out. Oh, right there. Because it was pretty much 0 anyway. So translate Z is 0. This foot is 10. And remember, I rounded that out because I wanted simplicity later on. Well, it's 10 units further ahead. So if this foot here is at 10 still, because that's the foot that was on the ground, that means that this foot should be 10 units ahead of that. So in this case, 20. There we go. Now I've got the steps to be exactly the same. That's all we really need to do. Now, do you have to do it that way? No. And honestly, like when I'm animating a character shot, I'll just get it close enough. Like usually it'll be like, oh, it's 10-ish. Okay, and I'll put it 10-ish forward. That's all you need. As long as it looks good, that's the important bit. And usually I like to avoid the perfect symmetry because it just tends to look robotic. The more you make things symmetrical, the more things feel weirdly not right. So it just doesn't feel organic. So I would rather have like a slight variation. So for example, here I could just go, bip. There we go. 19.817. Haha. And that's fine. In this case, I'll keep it around just because. With that, we can just keep going with our posing. So we can either look at our front pose or our first pose to see what our values were. So for example, the front foot had a foot roll of 10.7. The back foot had 27.9. So I could do that right here. Foot roll 10.7 and negative 10.7 and 27.9. Like that. And then I can move the character forward and do all of that. Again, I'm not a huge fan of doing all this math in here if I can avoid it. And this is also where the graph editor is your friend. So now we're starting to get into a point where this is where I would definitely want the graph editor open, because having to go back and forth. So let's say, for example, I want to reverse the rotate Y. On the first pose, that rotate Y is 7.861. Okay, so that means that this side is going to have to be the other side. So negative 7.861. Okay, and you have to do that all the time. There's two quick ways you can avoid this. The first is copy your first pose. So I'm going to take my pose here from frame 1, middle mouse drag to frame 13 and set a key right there. What that did is it just copy that pose to frame 13, and you can see it broke everything. From there, I can just move my character forward, and then I can just reverse some of the attributes. So for example, the translate X, it needs to be on the other side. So I'm just going to take this and go negative 0.0 or 0.64. Whoop, right there. Y and Z are fine. Rotate X, that's the tilt. That's fine because the tilt of the head up and down is going to be the same. Rotate Y, though, should be the opposite. So I'll just go negative. Rotate Z, that's the tilt this side, should be the opposite. So negative. There we go. Now all I need to do is adjust my translate Z to have that forward on that walk there, done. So I used that first pose that I did to help build in the rest. So you can do it that way. And right here, I'm feeling like my Translate X has a little bit of a pop here. So this will actually go into the next thing. So I think my contact pose here is done, except for this foot. It's definitely further in than when it started, it feels. So what I want to do is make sure that I copy the Translate X from the first pose to the last pose here. So I middle mouse dragged, I went to frame 1, middle mouse dragged to frame 13, and I'm going to right click on Translate X, key selected. Make sure that that stays the same. And also my rotate Y, it looks like that changed as well. So anything that has pink, it has a change to it. I want to make sure that those are all fine. Okay. There we go. So now we've got that cycle starting to work again. But we see a pop in the Translate X. So again, the graph editor is our friend. And you can see here, that's a big change right there. See how it goes over and then boom, right there? I feel like maybe I could tone that down a little bit. So maybe ease a little bit there. But we'll hold off just for now. We'll get a few more poses in here. So, okay, we've got that. Now we're starting to go on to the next cycle. It's the same thing as before. So we need to keep our character moving forward. So let's go 3 frames later. Set a key. So we have our contact. We go to our next down pose. Well, how can we animate this faster so that we're not just reversing everything and like having to copy paste and all of this stuff? Well, for me, that's where the graph editor comes in, because the graph editor is not only a way for me to quickly see what's happening in my shots, but it's also a way for me to make sure, or is a way for me to quickly reverse some animation because I can visually see what's happening. So let's kind of give an example here. So on frame 16, this is the down pose. So front foot, that's going to be easy. Flatten it out, done. That's all I need to do there. Back foot, I'm going to raise it up. Now the exact amount honestly doesn't matter. Again, I'm not trying to copy the previous pose here because it's a different foot. I don't want to mirror this exactly. So wherever it needs to go here, that's fine. Translate Z for the body, same thing. I just need to get that bend in the back leg and in the front leg here. So we get this. But what about the other attributes? What about the Translate X and the rotations and all of that? How do I make those so that they don't feel like one side is going way over here and then the other side is just going way over? That's going to feel very strange to have a lopsided walk. Well, instead of trying to do all that math, I can just look at my graph editor. So for example, here I see this is the down pose that I had animated before. So contact down right there. Here's my new down pose. It should be the opposite of this one. And honestly, the way I usually look at this is the down pose is like just slightly below this first line right here. So this one's going to be slightly above this first line right there. Done. There you go. That would be approximately the opposite. And if we look at the values, negative 0.608, and then this one is 6.35, 0.635. So I'm like 0.02 something off. That's micrometers. So perfect. That's it. And I'm not copying, and it's not like this robotic perfectness to it. So that's all it is. So now I can go through and let's go through all of our attributes. So again, rotate X. This is the tilt of the body as it goes through. As it goes up here, as it comes down, the nose needs to come down a little bit. Well, I can just find out where it was before, put it about that same level right there. rotate Y. This is the twist. It's going to go the opposite. So my down pose was, if I zoom out here, right on that first line here. So, yep, right there. And this is where the graph editor is very useful. I'm already noticing that my passing pose, see how it slows down and then speeds up here? This should ease in to the contact pose. So I can already make some adjustments right here and start polishing my shot. So I love working with the graph editor. But right around there. So I'm looking at the down pose here. Here's my other down pose right there. Rotate Z. This is the tilt. So down pose here, it's 1, 2.5. 2.5 right there. Yeah, so right around there. And already I'm starting to get that nice cycle right through there. Nice, no math, no copying poses and trying to think, wait, did I copy and do I have to flip that or whatnot? You can just use the graph editor. So let's quickly go through all of the other poses here, because at this point, it's just more of the same. So let's go through here. So this is now our passing pose. Now, the passing pose, like I was saying, is our linchpin pose. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit once we have everything else in here. So passing pose, let's get that body forward somewhere around there. That foot stays on the ground. This foot's going to come through the air. I zero out the foot roll because it's in the air. Now it needs to just use the rotations. So let's rotate that foot down here. There we go. So, okay. So that foot's in the air. Once again, ball roll. Don't drag the toes down just yet. We can do that a little bit when we have more frames in there, once we start splining. But for now, all I'm worried about is getting that nice natural motion right there. So from there, let's move the character forward. And once again, do I have to think of all of these attributes? No, I've already thought of all of the rotations and all of that stuff. This foot definitely needs to be rotated more here. Look at the angle of the ankle. That's what you always want to look for. Do I need to remember, like, okay, which ones are doing which? I need to think about it, but I don't need to have to like manually do every single one by hand. I can just look at my graph editor. So translate X side to side. This is the passing pose here. It's just past the second line. Yep, right there, done. Translate Y. Well, this should be the same. So my passing pose should be, so that's my passing pose before. So that's the 1, 2 right there. 1, 2 right around there. So that should be about the same height that I had before. Translate Z, we're going to figure that out in a little bit because I just need that slight forward lean. Rotate X. So passing pose is right here. Passing pose. Rotate Y. I love the graph editor. I don't know if it comes through very much by how much I'm gushing over it, but I do love the graph editor. So passing pose right here. 1, 2, and like 3/4. 1, 2. And 3/4, somewhere around there. Done. Look at that. Nice and easy. No copying and doing anything. No math of like going into here and looking at values and typing them back and forth. It's quick, easy, and again, it avoids that mechanical, like perfect, down to the decimal point mirroring, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is definitely something that you want to avoid in more organic shots. So we've got a couple more poses, but honestly, I'm trying to think, when do I want to talk about this here? let's talk about it now, since we're on the passing pose, and it is something that we can affect right away. So, the passing pose. Like I said before, I consider the passing pose a linchpin pose. And what I mean by a linchpin pose, it is a very important pose. You could also call it a keystone pose. It holds the walk together. Now, why? Why does that pose hold the walk together more than any of the others? You'd think the contact pose, because we start with it, is way more important. Not really. For most walks, so this is standard walks, not like a sneak or some sort of really exaggerated forward motion, but for a walk, the passing pose is important because this is where we have a lot of specifics that have to happen. The foot is flat on the ground. The body is slightly leaning forward above that pivot point. It can't be too far back. It can't be straight. It needs to be leaning forward. What that gives us is a very specific translate Z. Because if I go too far back here, that's not going to work. If I go straight above, that's not going to work. If I go too far forward, that's not going to work. There's a very limited range of where that feels good. All the other poses, the down pose, I could go a little bit further here. I could go a little bit further there. Those all work. Contact pose, I could bring this forward here and just raise the body up. I could bring it there and bring the body down. That translate Z has a big range of motion in there. The passing pose, very limited. Now, why is that important? A walk is pretty linear when we walk forward. We don't walk and go and jerk forward and stop and move and stop and move. No, we just walk in a nice constant pace. So we want our translate Z to be fairly linear. We're not robots. It's not going to be perfectly linear, but we want it to be pretty linear. So what that means is that once you have your two passing poses here and you have them pretty much where you want them to be, what you can do is take your curve, and I'm going to buffer it here just so we can see a preview. So in the graph editor, you can hit this button right here. This will buffer the curve, and then go to View, Show Buffer Curves. And if I move this, you'll see there's our old curve. What I can do now is I'm going to delete all the keys that are not the passing poses. So right there and right there. So we just have this. And then I'm going to take this curve and I'm just going to make it linear. So I'm going to click this button, and now we have that straight line right here. Now you'll notice that that doesn't really work because we're missing the beginning and we're going to miss the end there. Well, this is something we're going to be doing a little later, but we can apply it now. Is I'm going to take this curve right here. I'm going to go to Curves, Pre-Infinity, Cycle with Offset, Curves Post-Infinity, Cycle with Offset, and then I'm going to make sure View Infinity is turned on right here. And you'll notice that that curve now continues right here forever. What this means is now I have a perfect straight line for my curve, and you can see where my variations were, where definitely like this and here were way lower than what I had before. So if I go over my poses now, I can make some small adjustments. So for example, the contact pose, I could bring this foot roll up a little bit higher here, maybe adjust it just back a little bit, and just make some small changes here. Don't use this as like a perfect guide where, oh, it's in this position, it cannot move at all. No, it is a guideline here. So I can adjust that here. Comes through. There we go. Up pose. Let's bring that up just a little bit more here. Maybe a little too high. I'm going to bring the body down just a little bit. So something like that. Contact pose. Once again, we're just going to bring that foot roll up. Bring this one down. And then some slight adjustments here. There we go. So you can see it didn't really change too much about our walk. I'll definitely have to double check my translate Y because the up pose here is way too low. So I'm gonna have to make a few adjustments and we'll go over that in just a second here. But now I have that nice, perfect walk forward here. And that's what's throwing me off. Make sure it stays linear right there. So by doing this, you're definitely gonna have to make some changes. And this is why at the beginning I was saying that there's no like, oh, I've finished a pose, done, I never touch it again. No, we're always gonna be going back and making adjustments. But as long as we're thinking about these things one at a time and thinking through it, none of your adjustments are going to be like world shattering. It's just going to be making small changes to it. So for example, here, I definitely want my contact poses to not be quite as high. Those need to be lower than the up pose. So this is also where, once again, we are not robots. So I can take this curve and I can adjust it. I can make a little bit of a wave to it. So for example, here, I could bring this back just a little bit. Same thing with this contact here, just bring it back a little bit. But you can see how much it is not even close to what I used to have before, right there. The other thing that's gonna help a lot is your rotate Z here. So on the contact here, notice how the leg here is very stretched. Well, if I just rotate that Z down here, I can invert those hips like that and really have a big effect on those knees. Same thing with my rotate Y. So I don't have to kill my translations. So let me put it this way. Let's say the up pose. I'm not getting enough height in here. I need it to be higher up here so that we get that nice big push off. Well, I don't have to raise the foot up and mess up the whole foot arc. Instead, I could just rotate Z here, push that down a little bit more right there. Done. So I've just toned down my rotate Z. So right here, I can just take all my curves and just make them a little bit less. Which is fine because right now my walk was going like this as the character's walking. I'll just make that less. So I'm taking my rotate Z and just toning it down right now. There we go. And it avoids that big just lock off of the knee. And I'm still getting my nice contrast in the walk there. There we go. But we still have that nice translate Z. That's not nearly as wavy and chaotic as before. Now, before I go too much further, I will make sure I re-add the keys in here. I don't like having it so that it has no keys, because now I have full control over each pose. Okay. So there we go. Now, some of the poses are still a little off. I'm going to revisit those as we go through. That's fine, because we're going to do another pass on all of these poses here to make sure that things don't feel too weird. Okay, cool. So we've got that in place here. Let's keep going. So that was our passing pose. Let's get our next up pose in place. So 3 frames later, there we go. So same thing as before, foot comes through. It's going to skim the ground right there. Right in there. And then the body is going to go up, heel, comes up here. Now, before I do that heel, I can just get the body in place, and I'll do the same thing that we did before. I'm just going to look at my curve here, just see approximately where the previous cycle was. So translate Y. I've definitely put it way higher than it needs to be. It should just be there. That's my up pose before. Translate Z. Where do I put this? Well, just in line. And the way I will usually do it with infinity curves, I can just put it here, hold down the I key and then middle mouse click, and that just inserted that key right there for me. So again, with infinity curves, I can just hold down I, middle mouse click, and it'll add and key exactly where that was right there. So we've got that in place here. Rotate X. It is it. So contact down, passing up, right there. Oop, right there. Rotate Y. Contact down, passing up, right there. And then rotate Z, same thing. Up. So there we go. And actually that goes the other way because it flipped. So it should be 1, 2, 3 and a little bit. 1, 2, 3 and a little bit. And then let's adjust the others here to match that, because I did just kind of scale them arbitrarily before. So there we go. Now I know that the body is in place here, which allows me to just take this foot roll and just get it where it needs to be. But I think my rotate Y, I got it backwards here. Yeah, I didn't actually look at my rotate Y. So, yep, other way. That's better. So, there we go. Let's take a look at this here. Now, when we're looking at that foot, also keep in mind that we should be looking at the translations of the foot, which we didn't do earlier, and the rotations. So it's going to translate inwards. It's going to rotate to point back to where the toes used to be. Think of the Taylor assignment. And then as it swings through, we want to make sure that that ankle is in line with the lower leg there. Okay. So we get something like this. Cool. So with this, we're almost there. We just need to restart the cycle. We need to get that last pose to go back to the first pose here. So how do we do that? There's a lot of different ways to do it. But essentially, at this point, we want this to be almost precise. As much as we can, 100% the same pose. Because any little variation in that pose is going to create a offset as we go forward in our animation if we use cycles, which we want to do for a cycle. So, how do we do this? Well, there's kind of two different methods to it. For the most part, is either using a little bit of math or just kind of getting it, like, how to put this, using the graph editor's capability, essentially. So the way I'm going to do this, let's do the quick way first, which is my favorite way, but it's not always the most precise way, so I have to be careful with it. So what I need to do is I need to take frame 1 and put it to the end here at frame 25. That's where our next key is going to be, right there. So what I can do is I'm going to just take frame 1. I'm going to middle mouse drag the frame 25 right there and just hit S to set a key. Now the problem with that is now our animation is going to go through, whoop, and repeat, and we've got a problem. So what you can do now is take everything that's moving forward. So this is going to be the feet and the body. Let's look at just the translate Zs right here. I'm going to take all of these curves here, these keys. I'm just going to move them up. So what I'm looking at right here is, notice how there's one curve that's perfectly flat. That's the foot that's staying still on the ground right there. Well, all I need to do is make sure that that last key here lines up with those. I'm going to take all my keys, middle mouse drag it up, and it should snap into place right there. So if I get really close, you'll notice, look, it just snaps right there. And my hand is a little shaky right there. There we go. It's snapped into place. Done. There's my cycle. There we go. That was it. The other way you can do it is double check your math. So if we know that our feet should be 10 spaces ahead, so this foot is 20, the next should be 30. And you can see it's pretty darn close. So I can do 30. The first key, if this foot is zeroed out and the body is 5.5 for sake of argument. There you go. That's the term I'm looking for. That means that it's going to be 5.5 units ahead of this foot. So that's 25.5, which is pretty darn close. Right there. Now it's perfect. Done. I've got a cycle. Now, all we need to do is take our curves, and what I'm going to do is just go to curves, pre-infinity, cycle with offset, curves, post-infinity, cycle with offset. There we go. Now, always double check your curves. What you want to see here is all of the curves just looping perfectly like this. And only your translate Z going in a nice straight line like this, diagonally. If I had, for example, a small adjustment in my foot roll, yeah, like that, tiny little adjustment. If I look at my curves overall, you're going to notice that. See that? That's my foot roll curve. Had a little tiny adjustment. It wasn't the same. And as we loop through, that foot roll is going to mess up with every cycle and get worse and worse and worse until it's not even close to what it should be. So you can see here, it's not even flattening out on the ground anymore. So this is why you need to have your cycle perfect, and also why double checking here, just zooming out and then looking at your curve, is a good way to double check that. So with that, we now have a walk cycle going through. There we go. So we finished our blocking. Now, I animate in spline mode, so this is already in splines as well. But if we just look at it in spline mode, it's going to look a little weird. So I'm just going to enable step preview, and we'll just play that. So there we go. Here's our walk. And that's pretty good overall. Now, again, how did we achieve all of this? How did we get to this point? We thought through things and we paid attention to what should be happening. Now, again, I'm going to repeat this. When you're first starting out, you're not going to know everything to look out for. You're not going to know all of these things. But a lot of it comes down to observation of your reference and then understanding of the posing principles that you had done in the previous assignments, as well as starting to apply, for example, the bouncing ball as the body comes down, the pendulum as it goes side to side. It's the same principles. We're just applying them to the animation in slightly different ways. But right here, we have our blocking. Great. Okay. How do we polish this now? How do we go into splines? So let's say we're ready to go into splines. I'm just going to, let's actually save this because that's going to be very important to not lose everything.